The wind came down from the high ridges like a ghost with a grudge, kicking up dry curls of dust along the sun-baked ground. Dry Creek Hollow wasn't much of a town, not even by frontier standards. A string of leaning, weary buildings crouched in the hollow between barren hills, as if trying to make themselves small enough to be overlooked by the harsh world around them. The earth was cracked and brittle, a sickly color between rust and ash, and the sky hung heavy, pale and cloudless, like a faded sheet stretched too tight. Even the wind smelled of old bones. In the daylight, folks kept their heads down and their voices softer still. At night, the lamps burned low, if at all, and doors bolted tight. Dry Creek wasn't free. It belonged to a name spat from every cautious mouth and muttered in every prayer: the Black Vultures, a gang of cutthroats and thieves, led by a man colder than the earth in January, Judd Crowley. They took what they pleased, and when they pleased, and for years now, nobody had dared to stand against them. The sheriff was a name on paper only, and even the preacher kept his sermons clipped and vague, lest the wrong word bring the vultures down upon him. Along the outskirts of town, behind a weary fence of splintered posts, an old barn slumped in the dust. Its owner, a man known as Grady Boone, though most just called him Ghost Boone, kept to himself. He was a figure of muttered stories, a limping old cowboy with a face like worn leather, a wide-brimmed hat tugged low, and eyes the color of old smoke. Boone had a past, that much was certain, but it was a past no one dared ask about. He spoke little, bought his supplies when no one else was around, and made it his business to mind nobody else's. But this night, the old man wasn't alone. A girl no older than 16 crept through the thin shadows, her figure narrow and sharp, all elbows and ribs beneath a tattered dress that might once have been blue. Her hair hung in strings, streaked with dust and sweat, and her face was smudged with the hard scrapes of too many hungry days. Eliza May was her name, though nobody in town had spoken it in kindness for months. Since her mother died and her father disappeared beneath the vulture's boots, Eliza had scratched out what living she could. Most nights it wasn't much. Tonight, it was a chance at half-rotted hay for a mule barely standing. The poor beast waited out back of the barn, bones too close to the skin, one ear chewed ragged from old fights, and a dull, watery look in its eye. Eliza crouched low and moved with the wary grace of a coyote, slipping through the loose board at the side of the barn. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as she clawed at the stack of moldy hay. A voice, dry and low, spoke from the dark. "That's enough, girl." She froze. Her heart hammered so loud, she swore it would draw the rest of the town down on her. Slowly, she turned, expecting a raised rifle or a harsh hand. Grady Boone stood in the open doorway, a long shadow cast by the moon at his back. His limp made his stance tilt, and the lines of his face were so deep they looked carved from old stone. But his voice carried no anger, no threat. Eliza's throat worked, but no sound came. She stared at him like a cornered animal. He took a step forward, the limp pronounced, and gestured with a hand rough as old tree bark. "Come on, girl. Ain't no call for you to be eaten worse than a mule." She wanted to run. God, she should have. But something in his voice, something that sounded a little like weariness, and a little like the memory of kindness, made her feet stay put. Inside the small house, Boone stirred a pot over a stubborn little fire. The place smelled of dry sage and dust, but it was warm, and warmth meant more than pride. He set down a bowl, thick with stew whose ingredients she couldn't guess and didn't care to. A slab of rough bread followed. She didn't wait for permission. Hunger had no manners. They didn't speak much. Boone sipped from a tin cup and watched the fire, while Eliza devoured what lay before her like it might disappear if she paused. When she'd eaten her fill, or more likely, when she simply ran out of room in her narrow stomach, Boone gestured toward the back door. "Bunkhouse out there's empty. Ain't much, but it don't leak, and there's a blanket." It might as well have been a palace. She opened her mouth, maybe to ask why, maybe to thank him, but Boone only raised a hand to quiet her. "Don't need words for this. World's cruel enough without letting it finish off a girl for stealing what ain't worth feeding to a goat." Eliza left without another word. In the bunkhouse, She found a dusty bed with a lumpy blanket and a cracked window that let in the sound of the wind. She curled beneath the rough wool and, for the first time and longer than she could remember, slept without one eye open. Back in town, murmurs spread. Folks at the saloon bar whispered that Ghost Boone had taken in a street thief, and the mention of his name passing through the air made men look over their shoulders. No one had seen the old man show kindness in years, and from the deep corner of the saloon, a pair of eyes watched. Black Vulture's eyes. Judd Crowley's men. They saw Boone's mercy and marked it down. The wind howled on, carrying with it the scent of coming trouble. Dry Creek Hollow was a place where folks learned to disappear in plain sight. They kept their heads down and mouths shut, because there were some names you didn't say too loud, and Judd Crowley's was one of them. The Black Vultures had ruled the Hollow for 5 long years, a grip so tight it squeezed the courage from the bones of every man and woman left standing. Crowley wasn't just a thief and killer. He was a collector of misery. Folks he took a disliking to didn't just vanish. They left behind the stink of charred wood, or a branded mark carved into a corpse to remind everyone else what came of stepping out of line. Boone knew it. Every man with sense did. It was why nobody questioned why he kept to the edges of town, a shadow watching a dying place. But something about the girl made him restless in a way he hadn't felt in years. She had stubbornness in her bones, and no sense of when to quit. The morning after he found her in his barn, he watched her stumble through chores meant for a grown man. She pitched hay, mucked stalls, and chased chickens too ornery for their own good. And though she was all elbows and ribs, she didn't complain. "You ever ride, girl?" Boone asked one afternoon, his voice like gravel rubbed together. Eliza squinted at him beneath a mop of unwashed hair. "Bareback sometimes. Stole a mule once. Didn't keep him long." Boone grunted, somewhere between approval and exasperation. "Come on, then." He showed her how to settle a saddle, check the straps, and ease onto a mount without spooking it. The old sorrel gelding didn't take kindly to strangers, but Eliza had a touch, and Boone saw it. She gripped the reins like she meant to wrestle the world by its throat. The first time she was thrown, she climbed right back up, blood from a split lip trickling down her chin, her eyes shining with something dangerous. Next came the rifle. Boone laid the battered Winchester across a log and showed her how to clean the chamber, run a cloth down the barrel, and oil the action till it sang smooth. The rifle looked near as old as Boone himself, but it held a steady aim. Eliza listened more than she spoke, and Boone figured that was worth something. Some folks filled the air with noise when they were scared. She just set her jaw and took to learning. Setting traps came after. Wire snares for rabbits, figure 4 deadfalls for coyotes. Simple things meant to teach patience and precision. It was the kind of work that told a man if a person had grit or not. Eliza never backed down. Boone didn't ask what it was that drove her so hard. He figured he knew enough. Hunger and hate were strong fuel. The days stretched long under the pitiless sun, and each night the wind carried new rumors. The Black Vultures had hit a ranch north of the ridge, left the cattle dead and the barn in ashes. Boone didn't need to hear the names to guess who'd been lost. Then it happened. A robbery at Griggs's general store left old Tom Griggs dead, with a bullet behind the ear. Nobody saw who pulled the trigger, though everyone knew. The sheriff rode past the body without so much as tipping his hat and bolted his door. At Boone's cabin, the fire burned low that evening. He'd been oiling the Winchester, the lamplight flickering across the long lines of his face. The scars there, thin and pale, spoke of old knife fights and bullet tracks. Eliza sat nearby, whittling at a crooked stick. "You don't go past the barn after dark," Boone said without looking up. "And don't go near the saloon neither." "I'm not a child," Eliza muttered. "No," Boone agreed, sitting the rifle down with a final click. "And that's the part that worries me." Later that night, Eliza slipped away. She moved like a shadow toward Widow Hawkins' place, carrying a sack of biscuits and a strip of dried meat. The old woman had a boy half-starved to skin and bone. Eliza couldn't bear it. She made it halfway down the alley before 2 shapes stepped out from the dark. Well, one of them drawled. A big, greasy man with teeth like yellowed corn kernels. His companion's grin looked carved into his face. Little rabbits out of her hole. The second one sneered. The glint of a knife caught what little moonlight there was. Eliza gripped the sack tighter. Ain't your concern. Everything's our concern, the first one said, reaching for her. A flash and a crack split the dark. Boone's voice came with it, cold as an empty grave. Touch her, and you'll lose the hand. The men froze. Boone stepped into the open, his limp slow but sure, the rifle held loose in one hand like it weighed nothing. His face was shadowed beneath his hat, but there was no mistaking the intent in those old eyes. The two vultures hesitated. One spat in the dirt. You'll pay for that, old man. Been paying my whole life, Boone said, and drove the stock of his rifle into the man's gut so hard the sound of it cracked through the night. The second man drew a knife, but Boone's foot lashed out, catching him at the knee. In moments both were down, one gasping for breath, the other groaning in the dust. Boone didn't kill them. He didn't need to. The message was clear. By morning, word had spread like wildfire. Boone had struck a man. Two, in fact. Nobody in Dry Creek Hollow missed what that meant. The black vultures would answer. That afternoon, a note was pinned to Boone's door with the tip of a skinning knife. A single line scrawled in crooked letters. Turn the girl out or bury her beside you. Boone read it once, crumpled the paper, and tossed it into the fire. He didn't bother to tell Eliza. She'd known something would come. By evening, the town was tight with tension. Men gathered in hushed clumps, muttering about the old fool who'd finally crossed Crowley's line. Some pitied Boone. Some cursed him for bringing more danger down on their heads. At the saloon, Boone sat with a weathered man missing one eye. A leather patch stretched over the hollow. Their conversation was low, but Eliza, passing by with a water bucket, caught a piece of it. When the time comes, Boone was saying, we finish what should have been done years back. The one-eyed man spat into a tin cup. You sure you're ready, Gray? Boone's face didn't change. I've been ready since they burned my name into a pine box. The words lodged in Eliza's gut like a stone. Boone wasn't just some half-crippled drifter, and this wasn't a town she could run from anymore. Grady Boone sat alone in the dim light of his cabin, the wind gnawing at the walls like some hungry thing. A bottle of rye stood half-drained on the table, and in his lap lay the old Winchester, cleaned and ready, its wood worn smooth by hands that remembered too well. He stared at the flickering flame in the lamp and let his mind slip backward into the places he kept shut tight. Once, the world had known him by another name, Gray Boone, the Gray Ghost, a bounty hunter who'd ridden from Kansas to Arizona, chasing men too mean for jail cells and too wild for rope. Boone had been a killer of killers, a tracker who could sniff out a man's trail a week old and follow it through storm and stone. His name had made outlaws cross rivers and change their names. But all of that had ended on a night not so different from this one. Years ago, he could still see it plain. The way the smoke curled from his house before he even made it back from tracking a gang south of Santa Fe. The smell of burning wood mixed with scorched flesh. His wife, his boy. The black vultures hadn't spared them. Judd Crowley had been there that night. Boone had seen the man's pale eyes catch the firelight and heard the mocking whistle as he rode off with the others. Boone buried what was left and vanished into the dust, leaving the legend of Gray Boone to rot. For a long while, the only thing he hunted was a way to forget. But some ghosts don't stay buried. He heard her before he saw her. Eliza's step was light, but not light enough for Boone. She stood in the doorway, hair tangled, face smudged, her expression tight, with something between anger and hurt. You gonna tell me? She asked. Boone didn't turn right away. He took a pull from the bottle and let it burn its way down. Ain't much worth telling. Like hell, she shot back, stepping into the room. I heard him. Calling you Gray Boone. Heard what you said about finishing what should have been done. He sighed and set the bottle down, rubbing a hand over his face. Used to be a man folks paid to find bad people. I was good at it. Too good, maybe. Never cared much what happened to him after. Thought if I just ran far enough, it'd be done. But it wasn't, Eliza said quietly. Boone met her eyes then. There was fire in them, a raw, fierce hunger he recognized, because he'd seen it once in his own reflection. She was too young for it, too thin and battered by the world, but it was there all the same. I lost everything I had, Boone said. Thought if I kept to myself, no one else'd get burned by standing too close. Eliza crossed her arms. And what about me? You took me in, Boone. You showed me how to ride, how to shoot. You think you can just send me off now when the fight comes? Boone gave a bitter laugh. You don't owe me nothing, girl. Maybe not, she said, but you gave me something to fight for. That's more than anyone else ever did. There was no arguing with that. Boone felt something shift in his chest. Not the old pain, but something new, sharper. Pride, maybe. Or fear. The two weren't so different. In the days that followed, Boone put a rifle in her hands and showed her how to track by sign, how to tell the weight of a man's step by the depth of a footprint, and how to find water where the land swore there was none. She took to it like a hawk to the wind, lean and quick, and though she still made mistakes, there was a kind of grace in her grit. The black vultures didn't stay idle. Word came down that Crowley's men torched the Watson Ranch 2 nights after Boone's fight in the alley. Left nothing but black sticks and smoke. Worse, they took little Emma Watson, barely 14, dragged her off into the hills. The message was clear. Nobody crosses the vultures and walks away. Boone stood on Main Street that morning, the sun turning the dust to gold. Men gathered around him, not many, but enough. Old Hank Jasper, who still had buckshot scars from Crowley's last raid. Preacher Dobbins, whose son vanished a year ago. Even Skinny Peters, a wiry cowhand with a steady aim. Fear clung to them like sweat, but behind their eyes was something new. You really gonna ride on him, Boone? Jasper asked. I am, Boone said, his voice flat and steady. Any man wants to stay. I won't hold it against him, but I ain't letting that girl die alone. There was a long, thin silence, broken only by the wind. Then Peters stepped forward. Damn fool thing, he muttered. Guess I'm in. The others followed, one by one. By evening, word had spread like wildfire through Dry Creek Hollow. Ghost Boone's riding again, folks whispered. Even the sheriff locked his office and didn't come out. In a shack at the far end of town, Judd Crowley heard it too. The outlaw sat in a high-back chair, a brandy glass in one hand, the other stroking the handle of his long knife. His men lounged nearby, oiling guns and checking their ammunition. So the old dog remembers his teeth, Crowley mused. Good. Let's see if he remembers how to bleed. He sent his riders out, gathering his gang by Crow's Canyon, a narrow cut in the hills where blood had soaked the rocks more than once. That night, Boone left a scrap of paper on the bunkhouse table. It was plain, just a few rough words scrawled in pencil. If things go wrong, head south. Don't look back. Boone ***. He left it where she'd find it, knowing full well she'd spit on the idea. And she did. When dawn cracked the sky, pale and hard, Eliza was already saddling the old sorrel gelding. Boone approached, his face lined deep with worry, and for the first time in years, something like fear showed in his eyes. You were supposed to be gone, he said. I was never much for doing what I'm supposed to. Eliza shot back. You taught me that. He stared at her for a long beat, then nodded. You ride close. No hero games. No promises, she said and grinned. Boone swung onto his horse, the Winchester slung across his back, and looked over at the small knot of men waiting by the edge of town. It wasn't much of an army, but it didn't need to be. The wind picked up as they rode out, carrying the scent of dust, sage, and coming blood. Boone felt the old weight settle on his shoulders, and in spite of everything, there was a bitter satisfaction in it. Some debts never got paid, but he aimed to collect anyway. Crow's Canyon was a jagged gash in the earth, where the land split itself open and left behind towering walls of stone, streaked with old rust and bone-white quartz. At dusk, the sky bled a deep red, and the cliffs seemed to drink it in, turning the whole place into a graveyard painted in fire. The wind howled through the narrow cut like the voice of something old and mean, and it carried the scent of sage, blood, and long-buried secrets. Grady Boone sat his horse at the canyon's rim, eyes narrowed against the dying light. Below, the black vultures had made camp among the rocks. Lanterns swung from branches and tent poles, their glow casting long, crooked shadows. Men moved between fires, oiling rifles and sharpening blades, their laughter sharp and mean, carrying up to where Boone and his small band waited. The old bounty hunter counted heads. Maybe 20 men down there, not including Crowley. Too many for a fair fight. But then, Boone had never been much for fair. He looked to his side where Eliza crouched low behind a boulder, rifle in hand. Her face was streaked with dust, her eyes hard as flint. "You stay close," Boone murmured. Eliza gave a tight nod. "I didn't come this far to run." Boone managed a ghost of a smile, then turned to the others. Hank Jasper, Skinny Peters, Preacher Dobbins, and 4 more hard, gray-faced men with nothing left to lose. "2 shots when you're set," Boone told them. "Hit fast, hit hard. You see Crowley, you leave him to me." Nobody argued. There wasn't room left for fear. The plan was simple. It had to be. Ambush from above, hit them before they could scatter, and drive them into the choke of the canyon's narrow pass, where one rifleman could hold off a dozen. Boone raised his hand. A silent count. 3-2. A pair of sharp cracks split the dusk, echoing off stone. Chaos. Rifles roared from the canyon rim, splinters of rock and burning wood flying as the first wave of bullets slammed into the outlaw camp. Men cursed and dove for cover. Boone's small band kept the high ground, firing steady, deliberate shots. Boone's rifle spoke like it remembered the old days. A shot to the chest of a man pulling a shotgun from a wagon. Another caught a rider trying to make for the horses. The old bounty hunter's face was stone, his movements calm, precise. The men beside him watched in awe as Ghost Boone's legend came alive before their eyes. Down below, the vultures scrambled. Crowley's voice cut through the din like a whip crack. "Get up, you bastards. Flank him." A half-dozen outlaws took to the rocks, climbing toward Boone's position. Eliza saw them first. She dropped to her belly, sighting along the rifle's barrel. Her hand shook, just a little. One of the men crested the rise, raising his pistol. Eliza squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked, and the man pitched backward, falling hard. Boone looked over in time to see another climbing up behind him. He spun. His rifle jammed, but Eliza was already moving. A second shot barked from her rifle, and the man collapsed, blood streaking the stone. Boone met her gaze, a flicker of something fierce and proud behind his weathered eyes. "Good," he grunted. The fight raged on. Smoke curled thick between the rocks, the sound of gunfire bouncing off the canyon walls until it was impossible to tell how many shooters remained. Men fell on both sides, but Boone's group held the high ground, picking off outlaws as they showed themselves. Then came the voice Boone had waited years to hear. "Boone," Judd Crowley bellowed from the heart of the camp. "I see you, old man. Thought you were dead and buried." Boone's heart hammered in his chest, not with fear, but with a cold, savage clarity. He stood, letting his rifle hang by its strap, and slid down the rocky slope into the camp, leaving cover behind. "Boone!" Jasper shouted, but the old man didn't break stride. Crowley waited by a fire, blood on his coat, a long knife in one hand and a revolver in the other. He was a tall, broad man with a grin like a wolf's and pale, pitiless eyes. "Well," Crowley spat, "if it ain't Gray Boone, come crawling out of his hole." Boone came to a stop a dozen paces away. "You took everything once," he said, voice low and rough. "Not again." Crowley laughed. "I did you a favor. You were a killer long before I put your woman in the ground. Always a dog for blood. World just gave you the excuse." Boone's hands flexed. "You got one way out of this, Judd. Drop the knife." Crowley spat into the dust. "Come take it." The 2 men lunged at once. The fight was savage, no finesse, just old hate and brute force. Crowley's knife caught Boone's arm, slicing a line of fire through flesh, but Boone drove a fist into Crowley's jaw, sending the outlaw staggering. Crowley came back with slash, but Boone grabbed his wrist, twisting it until bones popped. The knife clattered to the ground. Crowley drew his revolver with his free hand, but Boone was faster. A flash of steel, the old hunter's boot knife, punched into Crowley's gut. The outlaw gasped, surprise widening his eyes. Boone leaned in close, his voice a whisper only Crowley could hear. "Your mistake was leaving me breathing." Then he drove the blade home, deep and final. Crowley sagged, the revolver slipping from numb fingers. Boone let him drop. Silence fell like a blanket. The gunfire above had ceased. The vultures that still lived were fleeing into the night, leaving their dead where they fell. One by one, Boone's men came down from the ridge, dust-streaked, bloodied, but alive. Eliza came too, her face pale, but her rifle steady in her grip. The townsfolk arrived not long after, a pitiful, shame-faced crowd who'd stayed behind when the fighting started but crept in when it was safe. Boone looked at them, read the guilt in their eyes. "No man owns this town now," Boone told them, voice carrying through the canyon. "Not anymore." Nobody argued. He dragged Crowley's corpse to a twisted old juniper tree at the canyon's edge, slung a rope over a branch, and strung the body up. A message in blood and bone. The wind picked up again, stirring the dust. Boone turned to Eliza. "It's done," he said. She nodded. "Not for me." Boone gave her a long, searching look, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you ride with me, girl. You've earned the name." They stood together as the sun dipped low, the sky darkening to indigo, the wind howling through the canyon like the last ghost of a past finally laid to rest. Dry Creek Hollow changed after that night. Slowly, like a wound starting to scab over, the town began to breathe again. Folks still flinched at loud noises, and wary eyes lingered too long on strangers, but the air felt different. The weight that had hung over the streets like a noose loosened. The black vultures were gone, their names spoken now like a bad dream, fading with the dawn. Judd Crowley's corpse hung in the canyon for days, a grim warning to anyone with a mind to fill his boots. Boone stayed, though not the way folks might have expected. He didn't take the sheriff's star when it was offered, didn't sit in the saloon swapping tales, or lead the Sunday prayers. He kept his place on the edge of town, tending his land, patching fence posts, and mending old saddles. But there was a quietness to him now, a kind of peace no one had seen in the man before. And though he spoke little, when he did, folks listened. The townspeople came by in ones and twos, bringing pies and tools that needed fixing, sometimes just standing near his fence, unsure how to say what they owed him. Boone never asked for thanks. He never needed to. Eliza May stayed too. The bunkhouse became hers. Boone left her the Winchester, cleaned and gleaming, its worn stock a badge of all she'd fought for. It hung over the bunkhouse door, a reminder to any man who forgot what kind of girl called this place home. She worked the land alongside Boone, learned the slow, steady labor of rebuilding. The folks in town started calling her the girl who rode with Ghost Boone, and the name stuck like a legend in the making. Kids whispered about her at dusk, imagining she could shoot the wings off a hawk mid-flight or track a man for miles through the canyon's winding trails. Some swore she could talk to wolves. Eliza didn't correct them. Truth was, she liked the sound of it. Weeks passed, then months. And one cool morning with the wind blowing down from the hills, Boone saddled his horse, packed a roll of supplies, and told Eliza to mind the land. "You're leaving?" she asked, though she'd known it was coming. Boone adjusted his hat, the lines of his face deeper than ever, but his eyes softer now. "Ain't a man made to sit still forever," he said. "Got one last stop to make." He rode out to the rise, where the dry ground gave way to a little stand of junipers. There, beneath a crooked tree, were 2 weathered stones and a marker he'd carved by hand. The names had long since faded, but he didn't need to read them. He knelt there a long while, speaking soft words to the dust and the wind. "I reckon it took me too long," he said, voice rough, "but I found something worth drawing iron for again. Didn't think I would, not after what Crowley did. But I did. That girl's got fight in her. Fire, too. She'll do right by this place." The wind stirred the leaves, carrying his words to the hills. Boone rose, touched the marker once, then mounted up and turned his horse toward the open country. He didn't look back. Some things you leave behind to grow. And in the years that followed, Dry Creek Hollow found a kind of peace. The law came back in time. The saloon stayed rowdy. The church filled up, and the land healed the way land always does when left to rest. But stories clung to that place like smoke to an old coat. They spoke of a girl who carried a battered Winchester and the ghost of a man who'd taught her to use it. Some nights, Folks swore they saw Boone's silhouette on the canyon ridge, watching over the town like a restless spirit. And some say, on nights when the wind howls through Dry Creek Hollow, you can still hear the echo of Gray Boone's 6 gun, reminding evil that no darkness lives here for long.